Welcome to Introductory Earth Science Lab. Today we will be continuing the discussion of plate tectonics, including a brief description of the Earth's composition, where the plates tie in, the mechanisms behind the different types of plate boundaries, and their prominent geological features. The Earth can be divided into different layers, both chemically and mechanically. From a chemical perspective, the Earth has three main layers: the crust, the mantle, and the core. The crust is the most outward layer, the surface of the Earth we walk upon every day, a thin, brittle outer shell made of rock. It is very small in relation to the rest of the Earth, only about 100 kilometers or 60 miles thick at most, and makes up less than 1% of Earth's volume. The layer beneath the crust is the mantle, a mostly solid bulk of Earth's interior. It is approximately 2,900 kilometers or 1,800 miles thick and makes up about 84% of Earth's volume. At the Earth's center lies a dense metallic core, composed of a liquid outer core and a solid inner core. Compositionally, the Earth's outermost layer is called the lithosphere, the two top layers you see on the diagram in front of you. It consists of the crust and uppermost solid portion of the mantle. The lithosphere is the most well-known feature associated with tectonic activity and is divided into 15 major tectonic plates. Those plates that we looked at previously move on the surface of the Earth and are responsible for all the tectonic activity and plate boundaries we will be discussing today. The boundary between the crust and the mantle in the lithosphere is called the Mohorovicic discontinuity, or the MOHO. The boundary does not exist at a uniform depth across the Earth, as not all areas of the Earth are balanced in isostatic equilibrium. The concept of the crust floating on the more malleable mantle is based on physical, chemical, and mechanical differences, is referred to as isostasy. A simple way of relating isostasy to something familiar is the concept of an iceberg floating on water. An iceberg floats partially above and partially below the surface of the water. The portion rising above the ocean surface is in equilibrium with the ice below. The density and thickness of the lithosphere will determine how high mountains rise above the surface or how deep the ocean basins will extend. Below the lithosphere is the asthenosphere, the denser, weaker layer located approximately 100 to 410 kilometers beneath Earth's surface. Beyond the asthenosphere is the remainder of the mantle, the outer core, and the inner core. Last week, we briefly touched upon the three different types of plate boundaries and looked at maps showing data along the plates. To refresh, we have divergent, transform, and convergent plate boundaries. These three types of boundaries all have different mechanisms and different geological features that are represented along each boundary. We will go more into detail of each one. Divergent boundaries exist where the plates are moving apart. Most divergent boundaries occur on the ocean floor, but are sometimes found within a continent. When a divergent boundary exists in the ocean, it creates a mid-ocean ridge, or a spreading center. As the plates continue to move apart, molten magma reaches the surface and erupts onto the seafloor, creating new oceanic crust. Mid-ocean ridges are elevated above the surrounding seafloor because the upwelling magma is hotter and less dense. The underlying lithosphere is thinner beneath ridges than the typical seafloor. Because of the lower density magma and the thinner lithosphere at the ridge, the plates float slightly higher above the asthenosphere. A narrow trough or rift runs along the axis of most ocean ridges and is often the site of frequent moderate to small-sized earthquakes, as you can see in the bottom of the figure here, a mid-ocean ridge. When a divergent boundary exists on a continent, it creates a continental rift or rift valleys. A notable example is the Great Rift Valley in East Africa, shown on the top of our figure here. As the continent continues to pull apart, the crust thins and the area between the plates is often lower in elevation. Eventually, the continent will split from itself and form a narrow ocean basin, like the Red Sea, which is located between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Divergent boundaries are characterized by things such as rift valleys, smaller earthquakes, the separating of continents, the separating of oceans, and non-explosive lava flows. Convergent boundaries are located where the plates are moving toward each other. When two plates collide, the denser of the two plates will bend and slide beneath the other along an inclined zone in a process called subduction. Different geological features are created depending on the type of plates that are colliding. When two oceanic or a continental and oceanic plate collide, shown above, an oceanic trench will form, as the denser ocean plate will be subducted below the other. The action of one plate subducting below the other creates magma within the subduction zone and often creates large amounts of volcanic activity on the plate not being subducted. For example, the Pacific Ring of Fire consists of volcanoes created by subduction zones and convergent boundaries as the surrounding plates collide with the Pacific plate and create a ring of volcanoes around the Pacific Ocean. The collision of the Nazca Plate with the western edge of South America creates the Andes Mountains and the corresponding volcanic arc through the mountain range. The convergence of two continental plates often results in mountain building events, as neither plate will sink below the other. Continental collisions form enormous mountain belts and high plateaus, such as the Himalayan mountains and the Tibetan Plateau. Transform boundaries occur when two plates move past each other. They are also referred to as conservative boundaries because crust is not created or destroyed. Often, transform boundaries will combine with spreading centers and form a zigzag pattern on the seafloor. As the plates interact with each other, shown in the figure on top, they break away like an uncut pizza in an irregular zigzag pattern where the crust is the weakest. Transform faults along mid-ocean ridges will run perpendicular to the axis of the ridge. See here we have the ridge running mostly north-south, and the transform faults run east-west, shown by the white arrows. The zigzag pattern often noted along the ridges reflects the alternation of spreading segments with transform fault boundaries. The most noted transform fault is the San Andreas Fault in California, caused by the North American plate and the Pacific plate moving past one another. Transform boundaries are noted by large amounts of seismic activity, no volcanic activity, and often the visible lateral offset of geographic features. Below here in our figure, you see the mountain ridge, one part moved to the east, one part moved to the west. Earthquakes commonly occur at transform boundaries due to the stress buildup from two plates pushing past one another. When the crust no longer supports the stress, it will break, creating an earthquake.